I'd like to welcome you to this presentation in the series of WORC pre-application topical videos presented by the Delta Regional Authority. In this video, we're going to talk about the application components that are required in the current open opportunity WORC Round 6. I'm Nicole Dunn from Chamberlain Dunn LLC. We're a consulting firm based out of Indianapolis, and we've been working with DRA since round 5 of WORC, but we've been connected to the WORC initiative since its very beginning in 2019. The Delta Regional Authority was established in 2000 as a formal framework for joint federal-state collaboration to promote and encourage the economic development of the lower Mississippi River and Alabama Black Belt regions. DRA's region encompasses 252 counties and parishes in parts of Alabama, Arkansas, Illinois, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, and Tennessee. These topical videos are presented on behalf of DRA to assist applicants with their WORC applications. There are 4 parts of the WORC application, all of which should align to form a complete package. They are the SF-424, the application for federal assistance, the project budget, the project narrative, and attachments to the project narrative. We'll dissect the pieces of each one of these in this video. Note though that many of these have their own short TA videos that dive deeper. So this video is going to give you the highlights, and I would encourage you to check out the other videos for more detailed information. Okay, starting with the SF-424, the application for federal assistance. This form is available on grants.gov, and the link is on page 16 of the FOA. It's always a good idea, even if you fill these out before, to pull down the most recent form because changes are occasionally made and you want to be sure you're using the correct and most current version. One other quick note, if you go to download it through the link on grants.gov and you get a message that says your reader needs updated, try opening it directly from your downloads folder instead. We've had that challenge in the past. And as I mentioned, there are several companion videos that dive deeper into different sections, and one of those is the SF-424, the 424A, and the budget narrative. So for this video, I'll just mention you need to find your 9-digit zip code. You will need to have an authorized representative sign it, and you will need to make sure you are registered with sam.gov. If you have not started that SAM registration process, I would urge you to do so immediately. Next is the project budget, which consists of 2 parts. Another form, the SF-424A budget information form, and the budget narrative, which should use the categories from the second page, labeled page 1A, of the SF-424A. Again, here, that video dives deeper into the requirements for these sections. Just know that there is no page limit on the budget narrative, and note that subrecipient budgets go in the contract line item of the SF-424A and in the contract section of your budget narrative. One of the most important things before you submit is to do a final check on all your numbers. Make sure the stated budget is the same on the SF-424, the 424A, in the budget narrative, and anywhere else you mention it. Double check that the numbers roll up correctly. We often recommend that budgets be done in some kind of spreadsheet software like Excel or Google Sheets before plugging in the final version so you can do one more check on the math. The project narrative is the meat of the application. Format-wise, you have 20 double-spaced, single-sided, standard letter-size pages, 8.5 by 11, and you must use Times New Roman 12-point font and 1-inch margins. They want you to number your pages beginning with 1. Reviewers will not read anything outside of that 20-page limit, and note that the budget narrative does not count toward that limit. This is not a requirement, but you are strongly encouraged to label each section so that it aligns with the FOA and to directly discuss connections to each of the 3 focus areas that are outlined in the FOA. Use the FOA's words and the FOA's terms so that the reviewers are not guessing whether you have included each component and have aligned to each focus area. Don't make extra work for reviewers or assume they will make those logical leaps for you because they most likely will not. These are the 4 sections of the project narrative: the statement of need, the project results that achieve the purpose of work, the project design, and organizational capacity and experience for project success. We will take each one at a time, and like the budget forms, there are companion videos that cover several of these pieces in greater detail and give you some unofficial tips from what we've seen. So I'd encourage you to check those out as well, and always make sure to read and reread these sections of the FOA for yourself. The statement of need is worth 20 points and has 3 parts. Part 1 asks you to describe the area to be served and the identified challenges. Workforce, of course, but you can consider including other relevant challenges that prevent economic success. The FOA, for example, suggests you can include data on wages, on educational attainment, workforce demographics, and other factors that demonstrate barriers that prevent economic success. Obviously, you have limited space, so just be judicious, include the most convincing and relevant things. On page 21, you'll also see a link to the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, and it notes that you can use data from that tool to support your description of the community and its needs. In this subsection, you'll also identify industry sectors or occupations you will focus on and why those were chosen. Finally, describe how current or prospective jobs in those sectors or occupations measure against the 8 good jobs principles and how improved job quality will positively impact both workers and employers. This might raise the question for some of you, what are those good job principles? Again, there are 8, and they are recruitment and hiring. Qualified applicants are actively recruited, especially those from underserved communities. Applicants are free from discrimination, including unequal treatment or application of selection criteria that are unrelated to job performance. Applicants are evaluated with relevant skills-based requirements. Unnecessary educational credentials and experience requirements are minimized. The second is benefits. Full-time and part-time workers are provided family-sustaining benefits that promote economic security and mobility. These include health insurance, a retirement plan, workers' compensation benefits, work family benefits such as paid leave and caregiving support, and other benefits that may arise from engagement with workers. Workers are empowered and encouraged to use these benefits. The third is diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. All workers have equal opportunity. Workers are respected, empowered, and treated fairly. DEIA is a core value and practice norm in the workplace. Individuals from underserved communities do not face systemic barriers in the workplace. Underserved communities are persons adversely affected by persistent poverty, discrimination, or inequality, including Black, Indigenous, people of color, LGBTQ+ individuals, women, immigrants, veterans, military spouses, individuals with disabilities, individuals in rural communities, individuals without a college degree, individuals with or recovering from substance use disorder, and justice-involved individuals. The fourth is empowerment and representation. Workers can form and join unions. Workers can engage in protected, concerted activity without fear of retaliation. Workers contribute to decisions about their work, how it is performed, and organizational direction. The next is job security and working conditions. Workers have a safe, healthy, and accessible workplace built on input from workers and their representatives. Workers have job security without arbitrary or discriminatory discipline or dismissal. They have adequate hours and predictable schedules. The use of electronic monitoring, data, and algorithms is transparent, equitable, and carefully deployed with input from workers. Workers are free from harassment, discrimination, and retaliation at work. Workers are properly classified under applicable laws. Temporary or contractor labor solutions are minimized. The next is organizational culture. All workers belong, are valued, contribute meaningfully to the organization, and are engaged and respected, especially by leadership. The next is pay, and this is a big emphasis for Work Round 6. All workers are paid a stable and predictable living wage before overtime, tips, and commissions. Workers' pay is fair, transparent, and equitable. Workers' wages increase with increased skills and experience. And again, for this purpose of the Work FOA, this is a minimum of $15 per hour. Skills and career advancement. Workers have equitable opportunities and tools to progress to future good jobs within their organization or outside of them. Workers have transparent promotion or advancement opportunities. Workers have access to quality employer or labor management provided training and education. Again, check out Appendix A for more on these and on the strategies that might help advance them. Moving on to the next subsection of the Statement of Need, Target Population. This subsection asks you to identify and define the historically marginalized individuals or communities you'll prioritize for service, and also how that service will address historical inequalities or barriers. The list of historically marginalized populations is early on in the FOA. It's on page 5 under Focus Area 2, and it does include a wide variety of individuals. So you need to explain why you chose this group or these groups for prioritization and how serving them will address those inequalities or those barriers. You also need to outline how you will successfully recruit these individuals, which could include things like strategic partnerships with organizations who already have access to your target population. One note I want to make here is that you will be held to these selections when you go to implement. So if you want to serve dislocated workers and incumbent workers and new entrants, you need to say that. If you say your project will serve dislocated workers impacted by SUD only, you are not permitted to serve incumbent workers impacted by SUD without a modification. The policies are that specific. And so whom you are permitted to serve is based not just on the FOA, but on how you write your scope of work in your application. The final piece of the statement of need is a description of workforce needs, your current or expected needs of employers or industries in your sector or sectors of focus. And as with everything, make sure your case for that aligns with your proposed solution, your proposed activities. You'll talk about those activities later, but set up the logic in this section. Then you will use labor market information or other qualitative and quantitative sources to provide a comprehensive picture of the current quality of jobs in your identified sectors in relation to as many of those 8 good jobs principles as makes sense. This third subsection is again where I will mention be sure that you make it very clear that you're including information about each of these 3 subsections through labels or other clear strategies. There are separate points for the project service area challenges and for the description of workforce needs and for the population, even though conceptually some of these things can overlap. So our unofficial advice is do not leave it to the reviewer to decide if you've addressed all 3 subsections. Make it crystal clear in your labeling and in your organization structure that you've done so. The other question we get a lot here is how to cite your sources. This section does ask for data to substantiate your needs. There is no specified format for that. On page 21, the FOA notes that applicants are expected to provide sufficient details and citations to demonstrate the information provided throughout the statement of need and attribute it to a verifiable source. However, applicants are not required to submit additional documentation. And indeed, later on it says reviewers will not read additional documentation if you include, reports or something like that in your attachments. They won't look at them. So just be sure that you can, a reasonable person can know where the source of the data is from and that it is a verified source. This section of the narrative has an entire video, so I won't spend long here. But the first part describes the requirements themselves, and that is that they are specific, measurable, achievable, and reasonable. That they are consistent with your needs that you identified in the last section. That they are consistent and logical with themselves. So for example, your total receiving services must be greater than or equal to the total that are obtaining employment. It would not make sense that you're saying more people will obtain employment from your grant than received services. Results is inclusive of outputs and outcomes, so you want to think both about the specific and measurable results of the project, which are the outputs, as well as the anticipated positive benefits or changes that your project will create and sustain, and those would be the outcomes. You will connect these outputs and outcomes to each of the 3 focus areas. Each focus area's results list is worth 10 points itself individually, and there are specific things under each one that you need to cover. So check out that entire video on this section and on reporting requirements for your project results. And I would also urge you to review pages 23 and 24 of the FOA for more on this topic. Third section is the heart of your proposal, what you will actually do, how your project is designed. This is where you will talk about your project strategies and activities. This is also where you need to make sure you are connecting everything in your application. Your activities and strategies should speak to the needs and challenges you already identified. It should be evident how doing these things will achieve the expected results you just described. These activities and strategies should be present in your timeline, and they should also be connected to how you are spending your money. So they should align with your budget and your budget narrative. And there are points for doing all of these things. Much like the project results section, the project description section has separate points for connecting your project design to each of the 3 focus areas. So once again, be sure you are using labels or keywords or other ways to indicate to reviewers that you are very clearly addressing each one. You must also include specific information about your project partners in this project description section. There are 3 types of required partners. You must have committed partnerships with evidence of commitment from at least 2 employer or industry representatives, from one state or local workforce development agency, unless you as the applicant are a workforce agency, and one community organization, unless you yourself are a community organization. You can also mention other partners, and the FOA gives examples of types of other partners on page 27. For each partner, and you can find this on page 26, you'll want to include the name, location, role, and connection to the stated need, and the services or resources each partner will contribute in the short term and for long-term sustainability. In your attachments, you're going to include some evidence of partnership, like a letter of commitment or an MOU. So be sure there's consistency between the information stated here and the information that is in that additional documentation. The last part of the project narrative is essentially your case for why you and your partners and your subrecipients, if you have any, are a high quality applicant, and the Department of Labor should have confidence you will be successful in your plans. So in this organizational capacity and experience for project success section, you will talk about how key personnel, staff, partners, etc., have the capacity and expertise to achieve successful outcomes, and either prior experience operating a federal or other grant program, or some other evidence that you will be able to be successful. This information should be supported by two attachments, by your financial risk assessment form and by your key staff experience and job descriptions. And we get this question a lot. The FOA does note that this section is not meant to treat with preference organizations that have had a federal grant in the past. So if you haven't, don't be discouraged. Just ensure that you are including that alternate evidence that you have the capacity and the expertise, the management systems and processes to be in compliance and to be successful with implementation. Lastly, there are 6 attachments, and while they are technically labeled required and requested, you would be wise to include all that apply. Required means you have to include it. Requested means that omission is not a screening tool, but it may impact your scoring. So the first is your abstract of up to 2 pages, which consists of 12 separate items that must be included to receive full points. You can see the list of all of those items on page 28. Make sure you go down them one by one as a checklist and include all of those in your abstract. The other attachments include first your indirect cost rate agreement if you have one. This does not impact scoring. Don't attach one if you don't have one. The second is the financial system risk assessment, which it says also does not impact scoring, but you are asked to include it. And you can find that template and the instructions in section 5B2 of the FOA. The third is your evidence of required partners with documentation that shows commitment. So this could be a letter of commitment, memorandum of understanding, partnership agreement, some other form of written commitment, and it notes that this attachment does indeed impact scoring. And the fourth is your project timeline. And again here, keep in mind, this is what you will be reporting your implementation progress against. So be intentional when you create this. This attachment does impact scoring. And the last is your key staff experience and job descriptions, and this also impacts scoring. Here's how the scoring breaks down, and I've rearranged this in order from greatest to fewest points. It's not an exact proxy for how you should spend your time and your effort and your space in each section, but it is a good guide. 42% of your points will come from project design, with just under a third of your total points, or 32, going just to your project description. Within those 32 points are 18 points for your project overview, 6 points for your project description connected to the focus area 1, 4 points connected to focus area 2, and 4 points connected to focus area 3. So altogether, 32 points for project description. Under that main project design section is also 10 more points for project partnerships. Another 30 points come from the project results and achieving the purpose of work section, with separate points again for each of the 3 focus areas. 20 points come from your statement of need and its subsections. 4 are allocated to organizational capacity, 2 to the budget and budget narrative, and 2 to the abstract. Reviewers look to see whether you've thoroughly met the stated specifications. That's full points if you have. Partially met, which is half points, or failed to meet, which is 0 points. And again here, I know I've mentioned this a lot. I cannot stress it enough. Don't make your reviewers guess where you've included that information. It may feel weird or unnatural or like it interrupts your flow, or the FOA may use terms that are different than what you would use internally. But whatever you do, follow the FOA. I very often start a grant application by literally just copying and pasting the headers and subheaders and sub-subheaders into a document in order. And then I include a comment bubble on each part that pastes in the requirements from the FOA. And I keep those comment bubbles in the document until the very end. More than once, I've had an internal reviewer or a partner make cuts or edits to a section that ends up cutting out one of the required components. And it is so much easier to have that language right there in front of you to reference, so there's no guessing or forgetting what the FOA asks for or having to go back and remap your information to what it requires. Just a few final reminders. We have an entire video series through the Delta Regional Authority at the URL you see here. Start your UEI, SAM.gov, and grants.gov registration processes now if you haven't already. And you can submit any technical questions to the email address you see here, dol-eta-dwg@dol.gov. Reference this FOA and be sure to include a contact name and number. Note there are a lot of questions DOL can't or won't answer, so you can also submit questions to us. My email address is going to be on the next slide, and we will do what we can to point you in the right direction and answer anything we are able to. And of course, your application is due by Thursday, June 20th, 2024 at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time, submitted only in electronic format through grants.gov. That's it for me. I'm Nicole Dunn. You can reach me at nd@chamberlindunn.com. Note that the end of Chamberlain is LIN. There's no A in the end there. And I would be glad to answer any questions that I can. Best of luck on your application.